Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Clint Bullock, Director of the Goldwater Institute, Sharp Norton Center for Constitutional Litigation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. This room is filled with so much energy and intensity. It's just fantastic. You would almost think that an earthquake happened a week or so ago. I want to add my heartfelt thanks to John Norton. As was just mentioned, I lead the Sharp Norton Center for Constitutional Litigation, named after Evan Sharp and John Norton, our two major benefactors. And I'd like to think that there are a lot of bureaucrats who wish that those two guys had not made quite so much money. I am thrilled to introduce Governor Chris Christie for lots of reasons, but especially because we share two important things in common. We've both spent significant portions of our career engaged in the joyous pursuit of suing politicians. And more important, we're both from New Jersey. Is there anyone else here tonight who was born and raised in the Garden State? Oh yeah, a goodly number of people. Well, as everyone can probably tell, we're different. I can see my wife, Shauna, over there nodding her head and saying, uh-huh. We Jersey folks tend to be humble, as well as uncommonly good-looking. We tend to say exactly what's on our minds without the intervention of internal editors. And we tend to see the world in simple terms. Like tonight, when they were serving this incredibly elegant dinner, all this fancy food, Christie and I looked at each other and said, "You want to send out for pizza?" Indeed, we're probably two of the only people in the room who, when we go out for a pie, we're not talking apple or cherry, we're talking pepperoni. And it follows that the political environment in New Jersey is unique. In college, I wrote an honors thesis about the mob-connected Democratic political machine in Linden, the city where I was raised. The story I remember best was about a lady named Josephine Uminski who moved out of Linden, then moved back after 20 years, only to discover that a vote had been cast in her name in every election since she left. Well, the city was awash in corruption, and eventually the mayor was convicted of various felonies, stripped of his office, and sent to jail. Whereupon the Republican governor, Tom Kean, pardoned him, and he went back to Linden, where, of course, he was promptly elected mayor again. Only in New Jersey. Political corruption is only one of New Jersey's problems. The taxes are shockingly high. Its deficit is staggering. The state spends $20,000 per student in some of the worst schools in the nation. And much of state government is in the vice grip of public employee unions, especially the powerful and profoundly reactionary New Jersey Education Association. This was the state and the mess in which Chris Christie was elected to govern. And the reason we admire him so much is because as governor, Chris Christie is practicing many of the things that the Goldwater Institute preaches: limited government, fiscal responsibility, lower taxes, educational choice. And he does it with gusto. After Christie was elected, the Democratic-controlled legislature wanted to increase taxes for people making over $1 million, which Christie vowed to veto. The Democrats warned that if he did not relent, they would shut down the government. Now, when the state was shut down during the last administration, Governor Corzine moved a cot into the governor's office, not Christie. He said, and I quote, I love this, he said, "Listen, you can close down the government if you want, but if you do it, don't think I'm moving some cot into the governor's office. I'm going to get in those black Suburbans, go back to the governor's mansion, go upstairs, order a pizza, open a beer, and watch the Mets." So what happened? The Democrats passed the tax increase, which the governor immediately vetoed, and then having met their match, they capitulated. And the Democrat legislature sent Christie a budget cutting $800 million in school funding and eliminating or reducing dozens of programs and agencies. That's the kind of Democratic budget a Republican governor can learn to love. Ultimately, I hope that Christie's signature achievement will be school choice. Literally the day after he was elected, Christie went to Newark, not exactly a Republican stronghold, and promised to bring school choice to that blighted district. You may have read that the governor is crossing party lines to join with my friend and favorite Democrat, Mayor Cory Booker, to administer a $100 million grant from Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg to reform the Newark public schools. And school choice is on its way, and it will be bipartisan too. Of course, yeah, I gotta applaud that too. Of course, the unions will fight him every step of the way. In fact, the teachers union reportedly sent around a memo asking people to pray for the governor's earthly demise. That may sound harsh, but just consider the irony. Chris Christie has so terrorized his adversaries that the teachers union is bringing prayer back to the public schools. A lot of people want Governor Christie to run for president. Indeed, the Virginia Tea Party recently voted him their first pick ahead of Sarah Palin and Jim DeMint. Now, Governor Christie hasn't asked my advice about running for president, but one of the cool things about people from New Jersey is that we generously offer advice even when people haven't asked for it. And my advice is this: the greatest possible contribution you can make to freedom is to be the best governor in the country. Political revolutions are not born in Washington, D.C. They're born in the states. Just as the tide turned in the War for Independence in the Battle of Trenton, so too was the tide of tyranny turned back in Trenton this year when Chris Christie was inaugurated governor. Frank Sinatra has a famous song about New York, which is a well-known suburb of New Jersey, that says, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Chris Christie is making it happen in New Jersey, and if he can do it there, we can do it everywhere. From one Jersey boy to another. Go get him, Governor. Governor Chris Christie.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. So listen, in the beginning of Clint's introduction, talking about the taxes and the spending and the bad economy in New Jersey, Jesus, he's depressing me. Supposed to give a good speech here, you're bringing me down. But he picked it up at the end, and that was good. I first want to tell you what an honor it is for me and for Mary Pat to be here tonight. I was mentioning to Darcy at the table that my first vote when I turned 18 years old in 1980 was sitting in my dorm room at the University of Delaware and marking, hey, there you go, some blue hens in the room, all right, and was marking my ballot for Ronald Reagan. And I remember, taking that vote very seriously. The first time you get the chance to vote. And I remember how clearly then Governor Reagan spoke to me. He talked about smaller, less intrusive government that was going to open up our country to exploit the entrepreneurial spirit that has always built it and made it a special and unique place. He talked about less spending so that less money would come to Washington and more money would stay back with the people who knew how to spend it best. He talked about a government that didn't regulate every little bit and piece of your life. And he talked about lowering taxes so that people could feel the economic freedom that comes from not having the government in your pocket every 15 minutes. And those principles, along with a strong and certain and clear voice, a moral voice on national defense and America's role in the world, spoke to this 18-year-old as I sat in my dorm room and had the chance to make that vote. And so for me to be here tonight at the institute named after the man who gave Ronald Reagan his start is an extraordinary moment for me and for Mary Pat in our lives, and your being here honors us greatly. And I want to talk to you tonight about kind of where Clint ended up, which was what can we do as a people to change the course of our nation from the place where that change always comes most efficiently, most effectively, and most certainly. And that's from the government that's closest to the people. And so someone asked me recently, as it's being mentioned all the time, a reporter said to me, well, why wouldn't you want to run for president? And I said, well, I'm governor of New Jersey. Why would I want to take a less powerful job? And, every day I think about the situation that I inherited from my predecessor and how I'm going to move our state forward looking always through the windshield and not looking in our rearview mirror any longer. I think politics all too often is filled with rearview mirror watchers. Those people who are looking behind at what's happened to try to dictate to them what they should do next, living their lives through the past. This is different than learning from history. This is having your principles dictated to you by the last election. Now, we liked the last election. That one went pretty well. But we can't have our principles dictated to us by elections. Our principles must come from here. And they must come from our shared experience. And so those principles that Ronald Reagan spoke so very clearly to me as that 18-year-old are the same things that, in my own way, I'm trying to execute upon in New Jersey. Let me give you some examples. Now, I took over from the person who had to be the most liberal Democratic governor in America, limousine liberal John Corzine. Governor Corzine, late of Goldman Sachs, had quite a career in New Jersey politics. He ran for the United States Senate in 2000 and spent $63 million of his own money in order to gain election to the United States Senate. After 3 years in the United States Senate, he decided that the Spirit was calling him to the governorship of New Jersey. And so, spending a thrifty $45 million of his own money, he was elected governor of New Jersey in 2005. Proceeded to contribute to the legacy being built by his predecessor, Jim McGreevey, in making New Jersey the highest burdened citizens by taxes in America. In the 8 years that Jim McGreevey and John Corzine ruled in New Jersey, taxes and fees were increased at the state level 115 times in 8 years. John Corzine alone in his 4 years raised taxes $9 billion. He led an expansion of government that was breathtaking. And upon our victory in November and during the transition, when I met with the former governor, he told me that, don't worry about it. You have a $500 million surplus for fiscal year 10, and you'll just ride that baby home till June. Got some problems to deal with in fiscal 11, but don't worry about it. You'll be okay. Well, a couple things happened. First, on the day I was inaugurated, we heard that morning that the governor was going to send tens of millions of dollars in gifts to our state's cities in the form of additional aid before I got to Trenton, literally hours before I got to Trenton. And so I told my cabinet secretary, as soon as I get my hand off that Bible, you walk off the stage and get on the phone and tell the Treasury to not send any money out of the Treasury by order of the governor. It's not a happy story. As Republicans do, our inaugural ran like clockwork. At 5 seconds to noon, the Chief Justice stood up, stood across from me, and by about 20 seconds after 12 noon, I had completed the oath of office, and I saw my cabinet secretary, Lou Getting, scurrying off the stage, cell phone in hand. And when my inaugural speech was done sometime later, and I left off the stage, I grabbed Lou, and he said, he wire transferred out tens of millions of dollars at 8:30 a.m. this morning, an hour and a half before you took the oath of office. This was the governing mentality of the Corzine administration. 2 days later, my state treasurer came to me and said, some news on that $500 million surplus. He said, it's a $2.2 billion deficit. And we have 5 months to fix it. We were already 7 months into the fiscal year. So I had two choices. Remember now, I have a Democratic legislature, Democratic state Senate and Democratic lower house. And so I had two choices. One would be to sit down with the leaders of the legislature and try to negotiate a way to cut $2.2 billion from the budget, knowing that they were wringing their hands with glee that they were going to have to force the new governor in the first few weeks of his term to raise taxes in order to close his budget gap. Or I could decide to impound $2.2 billion in spending by executive order. Now, for those of you who have watched any of my videos on YouTube, which one do you think I picked? For those of you who said negotiate with the legislature, the exits are there. You are not prepared for this speech. Go in the back, up the escalators, and drive home safely. We scoured the budget, and we impounded $2.2 billion in projected spending and signed an executive order to do so. And the great thing about executive orders is I signed it in my office and I didn't tell anybody, because that's the great thing about executive orders. You got to tell them when you want to. And so I asked the legislature to have an opportunity to give a speech before a joint session. I'd only been in office about 3 weeks at this point. They said, what's it about? And I said, it's about our budget situation in fiscal year 10. And so I came before the state legislature, and my speech was relatively short. I said, here's the deal. John Corzine told me I had a $500 million surplus. He lied. You all created this mess. I just fixed it. Have a nice day. And I left. Now, you can imagine that the legislature was a little bit unnerved by this approach, and the press descended upon the floor of the state assembly and said, what do you think of what the governor just did? And they said, it's outrageous. What did he just, can he do that? Is that legal? They didn't know what to do. In fact, they started calling me names. Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, you know, all those great leaders of the past I admire. And so the next morning, I was walking into the State House, and I had read the papers that morning with all kinds of insults hurled my way by the leaders of the legislature about what I had done and how outrageous it was and extra-constitutional, as if they're worried about that. And so I just happened that morning to walk in at the same time as the Senate president, good guy named Steve Sweeney, and there are lots of things that we've gotten along with and worked together on, which I'll talk about. But that morning I saw him, and I said, hey, Steve, I read what you said about me in the newspaper, and so I came up with an idea. I'm going to go upstairs, I'm going to vacate that executive order, and I'm going to let you guys find the $2.2 billion in spending cuts to fix it. And he said, hey, Governor, don't overreact. You know, it's just there's things we have to say in the newspaper. We actually think you did a pretty good job. Don't, you know, God's sake, don't send it back to us. It's an instructive story because leadership matters. Who you elect matters. Imagine if the people of New Jersey had chosen John Corzine. Get ready for tax increase number 116 in February. Instead, they elected me, and I promised them that I was going to make government smaller, that I was going to reduce spending, that I was not going to raise taxes, and that I was going to get government out of their lives. And ironically, John Corzine, through his irresponsibility, through his liberal philosophy, gave me the opportunity to prove myself in the first 3 weeks. So I am eternally grateful now that it's over for that opportunity. Now, we then turned immediately to the fiscal 11 budget. This was an interesting challenge because we had an $11 billion budget deficit on a $29 billion budget. A 37% deficit, the largest by percentage of any state in America. And so now the Democrats were really gleeful, and Clinton spoke a little bit about this. They were ready for me to raise taxes this time. He's got to raise taxes. He can't possibly do the things you'd need to do to close an $11 billion budget gap. They were wrong again because I had a certain set of principles that I ran on. I was going to make government smaller. I was going to reduce spending. I was going to lower regulation, and we were not going to increase taxes. And so we went to work, and we presented a budget in March that balanced the budget with no new or increased taxes on the people of New Jersey. And the folks in the legislature declared it dead on arrival without a tax increase. And Clint told you kind of how that went. He likes the pizza Mets story. And I think the important part of that story is to understand that that story shows that I was willing to make sacrifice too. I'm a Mets fan. I would have had to sit there if the government closed and watch the Mets. There is little more painful than having to do that. They said there was no way this budget was going to pass, and I will object to one thing Clint said. Clint said this was a Democrat budget. It was my budget that I sent to them They said it was dead on arrival. They passed it 2 days early with 99.8% of the line items exactly as I had sent them to them in March. And for the first time in 8 years, the people of New Jersey were not having their taxes increased, were not having their government grow. In fact, for the first time in more than a decade, they were having their government actually shrink. So we're proud of that. And one of the things that we did, though, was we knew that we had to stay on offense. And I think all of us as Republicans, as conservatives, have to stay on offense. And so while they were passing that budget at about 2:30 in the morning on the 28th, we were faxing letters to their offices, calling them into special session for July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd, and July 4th. Because property taxes in New Jersey had risen 70% in the last 10 years. Heard that right, 70% in the last 10 years. We have the highest property taxes in America. The average property tax bill for people in New Jersey is $7,400 a year. It's the average property tax bill. And I had been urging them all spring that we needed to pass a cap on property taxes, a hard cap on property taxes. And they stalled me and they refused to believe that I actually meant it. And so I called them in. And I told them, we're not leaving until we pass a property tax cap. Well, on July 1st, they didn't do anything. And they came in and they said, well, you're not going to really make us come back tomorrow, are you, Governor? And I said, I'll see you tomorrow. And July 2nd, they came in and didn't do anything on July 2nd either. Now, at this point, the pressure is on because July 2nd was the Friday of 4th of July weekend. At that moment, I inherited an entire new group of lobbyists to my cause. The husbands, wives, and children of the 120 members of the New Jersey State Legislature. I can only imagine that some of the conversations went something like this. I don't know. Give him whatever he wants. We need to get to the Jersey Shore. And so on July 3rd, we reached an agreement on a hard cap on property taxes of 2%. And starting this January 1st, property taxes will not rise any more than 2% a year on any community in New Jersey. And the only way they can rise above 2% is if the people of that community vote to raise their own taxes above that. It is time to take the professional politicians out of the game of raising taxes and put the people who pay the bills in charge of making that decision. We also dealt with pension and benefit reform. And in March, struck a bipartisan compromise to significantly reform the pensions and benefits of all new employees who come into public employment. And we are now confronting, in this session, doing exactly the same thing for current employees. Now, let me tell you that many people say that this reform agenda, the reform agenda of cutting spending and the size of government, and we had a 9% decrease in the size of state government in real spending, not projected spending, real spending, a 9% decrease year over year. But the real reform issues still on the table are pension and benefit reform and education reform. Let me tell you why pension and benefit reform is so important in New Jersey by giving you some really interesting statistics. The pension fund in the state of New Jersey is currently $46 billion underfunded. If we do nothing except make our contribution over the course of the next 15 years, those figures will rise to $181 billion. Now, you know, it seems to me that that tells us something very clearly. We don't have a contribution problem, we have a benefit problem. We have a problem that needs to be addressed by changing the very nature of public pensions. And we've made those kind of proposals that would, in fact, in 10 years, cut the deficit in half and put us on a glide path towards balancing that pension problem. Now, you can imagine that for public employees in New Jersey, this is not an extraordinarily popular position to take. To tell you a little bit about me, I proposed this on a Tuesday, and that Friday, I went to the New Jersey Firefighters Convention. 7,500 firefighters in Wildwood, New Jersey. Yes, Wildwood, pun intended. And I went there that day and I came onto the stage in front of 7,500 firefighters, and not all of them were booing, but a good percentage of them were. They were booing and yelling and screaming, and I stood on the podium, and the head of the Firefighters Association was saying, "Governor, we're so sorry. I don't know." I said, "Don't worry about it." I stood up at the podium just as I am here, and I said, "All right, let's go. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. More. Let's go. Boo some more." And they did. I said, "Good, I'm getting somewhere." They're listening to their governor. And when they finally worked themselves through it, this was my message that day to the firefighters. I said, "Understand you're angry. And I understand you feel betrayed. And I understand that you're worried and you feel threatened and you feel unappreciated. And I understand you feeling all those ways, but here's the thing. For 20 years, governors have come to this convention every September, and they've lied to you. And they promised you benefits that they had no understanding of how they were going to pay for. And they told you not to worry, that they were going to take care of you. Now, understand why you're angry, but here's what I don't understand. Why are you booing the first guy who's come in here and told you the truth? And the truth is that if we don't work together to fix this problem now, our pension system will be broke by 2020. That's 9 years away. And as I looked out at that audience, I said to them, there's a lot of you in here who think you're retiring sometime in the next 9 years. And that you'll have this pension to take care of you and your family in your older years because you put your life on the line for the people of our state every day. Now, you could bury your head in the sand and you can boo me and you could vote me out in 3 years if you want. But none of that is going to change the reality of the numbers that I'm dealing with. And when I was done, they were cheering. And when I walked out, they mobbed me and said, "Thank you, Governor, for telling us the truth. We're not happy, but thank you for telling us the truth." People misunderstand my comments about public sector workers. In the main, whether you're talking about police officers, firefighters, or teachers, public sector workers in the main are extraordinarily dedicated people. Yeah, of course there are exceptions, just like there are bad lawyers and bad doctors and bad engineers and bad folks in every profession. My problem is not with those people. My problem is with the union bosses who take advantage of their members to build their own base of political power. This is also clear in our public benefit system. In our New Jersey health benefit system for public workers, it makes the pension system look robust. Our current health benefit program for public sector workers is underfunded by $67 billion. You know, if you look at it, this year our state spends $4.3 billion on just public sector employee health benefits and retiree health benefits. And that number will go up 40% over the next 4 years if we do nothing to change it. Why is that? Well, I was a federal employee for 7 years as the U.S. Attorney, and I picked up 34% of the premium for my health insurance. In New Jersey, folks pay 1.5% of their salary towards their health insurance if they pay anything at all. It amounts essentially, when you add co-pays and deductibles, to a split of 92% for the government, 8% for the employee. This is unsustainable. We are broke because we've made promises that we can't keep. And so we put forward an aggressive health benefit reform package that says everyone must share in the sacrifice. And you must pay more for your health insurance if you want great health insurance. Everyone else is doing it. If I offered you the deal tonight, I said, listen, New Jersey's got open enrollment. You people in Arizona, you want to only pay 8% of your total health insurance costs? Come on up, I'll sign you up. I would get stampeded at this podium. It's wrong. And someone needs to say it out loud and not be afraid. The reform agenda is put in the context by political operatives and experts as being the third rail of politics. Don't talk about reducing public sector pensions. Don't talk about reducing public sector health benefits. And lastly, for God's sake, don't talk about the teachers' union. See, because everybody loves their teachers. Everybody loves their teachers. Everyone who went to public school or parochial school or private school, you look back on your school years, and I'm sure there's a teacher you love who made a huge difference in your life, and hopefully more than one. See, my quarrel is not with the teachers. It's with a union in New Jersey that represents all that is wrong with the public sector union movement in our country. Now, in New Jersey, the New Jersey Education Association is the largest teachers union. It has over 200,000 members. Here's how it works in New Jersey. If you work in the public schools, you must be a member of the NJEA. And your dues are $731 a year, and they are generously deducted by the state or local government directly from the person's payroll and wire transferred at no charge to the Palace on State Street, the second largest building on State Street in Trenton next to the State House, is the palatial headquarters of the NJEA. They collect $130 million a year in dues. Yet they contribute not a penny of that money to their members' salaries, except, of course, for their executive director, who makes $550,000 a year. They pay nothing towards their members' pensions. They pay nothing towards their members' health benefits. What do you use that $130 million a year for? To pay for an army of lobbyists who descend upon the State House and sit arms folded and staring at every legislator who has the temerity to discuss anything regarding education reform. They use it to donate to the campaigns of people who blindly follow their agenda and to donate against those people who don't. They use it, as they've used it with me since March, to spend $8 million in New York and Philadelphia TV and radio ads to attack me because I have the audacity to tell the truth about them. And here's the truth. You know, you don't have to be a member of the teacher union, you don't want to, but there's a statute in New Jersey that says if you want out, you pay 85% of $730 a year to be out. It's true. For people in my generation, think about it this way. The teachers union in New Jersey is like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And so, yes, I've had some direct conversations with the teachers union, many of which you have all seen over the course of the last 10 months. Clint alluded to the prayer for my death, put out by the head of the teachers union in the largest county in New Jersey. There are a bunch of people that I met when I was taking photos before from Ridgewood, New Jersey, right? Where are the Ridgewood people? Yeah, okay. Your county. Woohoo. It was your county. Bergen County, New Jersey. Mr. Coppola, the head of the Bergen County Education Association, put out an email urging members to pray for my death. People say, why don't you meet with the president of the Teachers Union, Governor? Why don't you meet and sit down and talk with her? I have. After that email was sent out, she put out an official apology and called the office to speak to me about it. And I said, well, she's just across the street. So I said to my chief of staff, why don't you welcome her over? She can apologize in person. So I invited her over. She came into the office, and I sat down at my desk, and she sat across from me, and we both looked at each other. And I said, well. And she said, yes. And I said, I'm returning your call. This is my return of your call. What do you have to say? I said, oh, well, Governor, I obviously we think that what was said was inappropriate, and we apologize. And I said, well, thank you. That's very nice. I appreciate that. I said, you're going to fire him, right? She said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, one of your guys sent an email praying for me to die. Like, that certainly is a fireable offense, right? I said, well, he doesn't directly work for me. He's voted in by his members. I said, all right, and we're going to play that game. Okay. Certainly you're going to call upon him to resign. And she said, no, I'm not. I said, see, this is what I don't understand about you people. I said, if my chief of staff, who was sitting in the chair next door, I said, if he had sent out that email praying for your death, there would have been 5,000 teachers on the front steps of the State House screaming and yelling for him to be fired, and you would have been too late, because I would have already fired him. If a student sent out that email praying for the death of his teacher, he would have been suspended from school and sent to mandatory counseling. Yet if a teachers union leader does it, it's no big deal. I looked at her and said, listen, you may have gotten used to living by this double standard, but that double standard doesn't exist anymore. And I stood up and said, good day. She said, well, we have important issues to discuss of education in New Jersey. I said, not with me, you don't. I said, you can come and talk to me when he's out of his job and not 1 minute before. She stood up and said, Governor, you're not a prosecutor anymore. Don't treat me like I'm a criminal. You're not a prosecutor anymore, you're a governor. And I said, I am aware. I am aware. I said, but good day. Now, you need to understand at this point, temperatures got a little bit higher, and there was a little additional yelling back and forth that probably would be inappropriate for me to detail here. My chief of staff is a wonderful guy, former state legislator, former senior executive at the Pfizer Corporation, and a very low-key, understated guy. He had quite never seen anything like this before. And so when she finally says, I won't be spoken to that way, good day, and she goes to leave, my poor chief of staff doesn't know what to do at this point, and he says, thanks oh so much for coming by. And when she cleared the room, I said to him, thanks oh so much for coming by. What the hell was that? He said, I don't know. I never saw anything like that before. You know, we're in a huge budget crisis, an $11 billion deficit. And as Clinton mentioned, I had to cut over $800 million in K-12 education funding. That was on top of the $475 million in K-12 education funding I cut to reach that $2.2 billion number I spoke about before. So we're talking about nearly $1.3 billion in cuts to K-12 education. And I asked them if they could just take a pay freeze for 1 year. All the teachers in New Jersey take a 1-year pay freeze and contribute 1.5% of their salary to their health benefits. And we could have made up of the $800 million gap, $700 million of it. There would have been no teacher layoffs. There would have been no reduction in programs. The response from the teachers union was no. No. And so what did we do? In New Jersey, we vote on our school budgets. Every district votes on their school budget, and for the last 10 years, it's been a 74% pass rate. So when they said they weren't going to take the pay freeze, someone asked me at a press conference, well, what do you think voters should do, Governor, in the school board elections if their teachers aren't taking a pay freeze? Now, I hadn't thought about that question before they asked, and so I just did what I normally do, which was answer it. And I said, I don't know about them, but I wouldn't vote for a school budget in a town where teachers weren't taking a pay freeze. I went back to the State House after that, and that chief of staff I was talking to you about was waiting in the office for me. Now, I think the vice president who's here tonight will tell you, having had experience with this, when you come back to your office and your chief of staff is sitting in your office waiting for you, it doesn't mean he's thrilled with what you just did. So he said to me, I hear we're against the school budgets. And I said, yep. And he said, they've passed with a 74% passage rate over the last 10 years. And I said, I know. And he said, just a question. Think this might have been something we wanted to bat around a little bit before we decided to do it? I said, well, you weren't at my press conference. I didn't know. So I said, we better go out and win. So we spent the next 2 weeks before the elections going out and explaining to people that in a 0% inflation world, the teachers union was demanding 4 to 5% annual pay increases. That in a world where health insurance costs were skyrocketing, they were demanding free health insurance for their members. And that's what was driving up the cost of education in New Jersey, and that's what was driving up property taxes. And they needed to send a message to the union by voting no on the budgets. So the night of the school board election, and you know how they work school board elections in New Jersey. They have them on a Tuesday, like the third Tuesday of April, because that's when everybody votes. And they have it like from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock at night. And they have it in the place where you don't vote for all the other elections. They make it, in other words, as impossible as they can for anybody to vote other than teachers and friends of teachers. So we undertook a big public relations campaign, and that night, Mary Pat and I sat down in our living room, we opened up the laptop, and we started to look for the results, because they don't put school board results on the TV. So we're watching them, and we're both nervous, because we know I got a lot at stake on this one. Well, by the end of the night, 59% of the school budgets in New Jersey were defeated, the highest rate ever in the history of the state of New Jersey. And I tell you this it wasn't because of me. It was because someone finally told the voters the truth. You see, the teachers union always says everything they do is for the kids. It's for the kids. You've seen those ads, right? It's for the kids. You need to vote for this bigger budget because it's for the kids. You need to increase my pay because it's for the kids. You need to give me free health benefits because it's for the kids. Now, let's take the logical extension of this argument. Now, Mary Pat and I have 4 children. Andrew is 17 and Sarah's 14. Patrick's 10 and Bridget is 7, going on 17. So let's talk about Bridget for a minute. Now, this is a pretend story. I'm saying this to be illustrative. If you want to believe what the teachers union is selling you on this, this is what you have to believe. Bridget just came home last week with her report card from the first marking period. And let's say Bridget handed me that report card and it wasn't so good. And I said to her, Bridget, what happened? She said, Dad, I don't know. I can't concentrate. I can't focus in school. I can't get my studies done. Oh, geez, Bridget, don't be upset. Why would that be, honey? Dad, I can't believe it's true. I said, what, honey? Tell your father. She said, I hear you froze my teacher's salary. And I hear that you're making her pay 1.5% of her salary for her health benefits. Dad, stop the madness. If you will just give the teacher her 5% raise and her free health benefits, I swear I'll get straight A's. It's because it's for the kids. Now you laugh. This is the crap I have to listen to in New Jersey. This is what the teachers union is trying to sell. And I don't fight with the teachers union because I'm relishing it or looking for a fight. I'm fighting with them because that is the fight worth having. You see, because we now have a system in education in America which is unique to any other profession in our country. If you're outstanding, if you're mediocre, if you're horrible, you get paid the same. In what other profession in America does that happen? Well, now that was very good, but listen. You flew me in from New Jersey to be funny, not you. Now, we've got a situation with school teachers, because of the union's demands, where you cannot do what is the most American thing in the world to do: reward excellence. Teachers who are excellent should be carried on our shoulders to school every day for the extraordinary service that they're providing to the future of our states and our country. And teachers who are excellent should be paid more than teachers who are mediocre, and certainly, lousy teachers should not be paid, should not be given tenure. They should be shown the door because they're ruining our children's future. Now let's talk about Bridget again. Now imagine, I'm sure most of you who have children in this room have gone to back to school night. Now Mary Pat and I went to back to school night about 7 or 8 weeks ago, and we have 4 children, and believe it or not, they're in 3 different schools, and they all scheduled back to school night on the same night. So we're running around like crazy getting all these back to school nights, and you know what they're generally like. You've been to them. But imagine if you went to back to school night at a public school in New Jersey and they actually told you the truth. It might go something like this. So you go into your 2nd grade daughter's class, and the principal walks in and says, "Good evening, parents, and welcome to back to school night. This year, your children have Mrs. Smith." Now, to be completely candid with you, Mrs. Smith is a lousy teacher. Now, we've tried very hard. We've sent her for extra training. We've spoken to her. We've counted her. And it's been years now, and she hasn't gotten a lick better. Her children generally don't learn at the same rate as the other teachers. Children don't seem to enjoy being in her class. And she doesn't seem to really give a darn. Here's the problem, though. We have a union contract that's about this thick. And she has tenure, which means we can't fire her for any reason at all. And so we're stuck with her. Have a great year. Now, you see, the thing is, they never say that to you. But it is happening every day in classrooms across New Jersey. 104,000 children in New Jersey are stuck in 205 chronically failing schools, presided over by chronically failing teachers who are kept in place by a monopolistic teachers union who says that we cannot reward excellence, we cannot improve mediocrity, and we cannot dispense with failure. Education reform is about fixing that problem first. First, we must fix that problem. And education reform is about parental choice. Education reform is about saying that no matter what your zip code, no matter how much money you make, you as a parent have the right to choose how your children should be best educated. And in places like the city of Newark, where we spend not $20,000, Clint, $24,000 per pupil per year for a school district that graduates 1 out of every 2 kids. And for the one that does graduate of every 2, 95% of them, if they go on to college, need remedial classwork in order to qualify to take college-level classes. Yet in that same place, there is the most outstanding elementary school in New Jersey, the most outstanding public elementary school in New Jersey, a charter school called the Robert Treat Academy, where there is a waiting list of 4,000 children to get into that school. Because the teachers union doesn't want choice. They want to restrict choice, because real choice means people will run from those chronically failing schools to the successful ones, and the chronically failing teachers will be standing in classrooms by themselves. They don't want that, and so they stand in the way of that. At the Robert Treat Academy, which was the school Clint mentioned that I visited on the day after my election as governor, I've been there many times as United States Attorney, and during one of those visits, I met a woman whose son at that time was in the 4th grade. He had been in the Robert Treat Academy since kindergarten. He had gotten in through the lottery. For any of you who've seen the movie Waiting for Superman, you know about these lotteries. Picking a ball or a piece of paper out of a bin to decide who gets in and who does not. And I asked that mother that day, what was it like that night at the lottery? And she said to me, Chris, I was sitting there thinking to myself that whether my son gets his number picked out of this bin is the difference between him going to college and going to jail. He was 5 years old. And his mother understood, this single mother, understood that if he had to go to the Newark public schools, that he was much more likely to go to jail than to go to college. School choice is not school choice. It's parental choice. Parents have to be back in charge of their children's education, not the educational bureaucracy of the teachers' union. These are the fights we're having, not just in New Jersey, but that we have to have across the country. And if the election results of November 2nd are to mean anything, we must take on these fights. I met today in San Diego with a group of the new governors at the Republican Governors Association meeting. And we were in a forum called Good Policy Equals Good Politics. Catchy phrase. And I was joined by a great group of current governors. Haley Barbour from Mississippi, and Mitch Daniels from Indiana, and Bob McDonnell from Virginia, and Bobby Jindal from Louisiana joined me up on that stage, and Tim Pawlenty from Minnesota, to talk about what that means. And I got to speak last. And what I said to these folks is this: we can all sit around these rooms with people who share our vision of the future and talk about how we're going to make great change and we're going to make a difference. The fight comes when you go home, because your bureaucracy won't want to give in, because the special interests won't want to give in, because your political advisors will tell you these are third rail issues. Incrementalize. Just kick the dog a little, then cuddle up to him after that. Don't make too many waves. You need to run for re-election. Political capital is meant to be spent and invested, not kept in a desk drawer to be admired. Because if you put that political capital in a desk drawer and you keep opening it just to look at it, go, oh, look at my political capital. One day you're going to open that drawer, it's going to be gone. Because political capital is either spent and invested or it dissipates. It just goes away. Because people will conclude that the political capital they gave you, you are incapable or unwilling to spend. We have a choice, everybody, to recognize that people want their leaders to do hard work. They've stopped believing the sound bites and the trite platitudes that both parties have engaged in over time. To the extent that they want anything from government except to be left alone, they want us to stop telling them that something isn't achievable. They want us to give it to them straight. I tell them the truth. They want to be treated like adults again and not pandered to like children. They want folks to say to them, times are tough, sacrifice must be shared, we're in a hole, and the only way to get out of it is for us to help each other up out of the hole. And that's hard work. But the forces arrayed against that are significant. And I'll just end by telling you this, to give you an idea of what we're up against. I wrote this down because I was out here and my dear friends at the New York Times decided that today was a day to once again editorialize about Governor Christie of New Jersey. Now, as you might imagine, the New York Times and I don't often see eye to eye. Now, you all may have heard a bit, and some of you mentioned to me about this tunnel that was proposed to be built below the Hudson River for trains to take people from New Jersey to New York and back. That this was slated to be a nearly $9 billion project. New Jersey was paying 70% of the cost, the federal government 30%. The state and the city of New York, 0%. And cost overruns were already estimated to be $2 to $5 billion over that. And New Jersey was responsible under the contract with the federal government for every nickel of cost overrun. And I looked at this and just said, we're broke. Like, we have the third highest debt load in America, only behind New York and California. We have huge structural budget deficits. We have the highest tax rates in America. We have 9.2% unemployment. And we haven't grown net private sector jobs in the last 9 years. I don't think now's the time for us to lard more debt on top of ourselves, spend money we don't have, in order to make some people feel better about the length of their commute from New Jersey to New York. Now, when I put a delay on this project, I only heard from 3 people. Michael Bloomberg, the mayor of New York City, David Paterson, the governor of New York, and New York City developers. As the governor of New Jersey, that made me even a little suspicious. And so I canceled the project. And I canceled the project for one very simple reason. We cannot afford it. People have to start saying that. And I said, you know, listen, if New York wants to have this project, how about New York pays for some of it? When I said I was going to cancel it, Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Patterson put out public statements saying, you know, oh, this is awful, it's a terrible thing. So I called both of them. I said, how much you want to put in? They said nothing, and I said, thank you very much. And the project's still canceled then. And now, you know, I've always said to people, if you want to unite New Jersey, there is one certain way to do it. Have New York start sticking it to us. We hate New York. And they always try to take advantage of New Jersey. And so, in a recent poll, they said, well, what do you think of Governor Christie's argument that New York not paying its fair share? Do you think that's a good argument? Imagine this, and I don't like to talk about poll numbers too much, but this is extraordinary. 90% of the people in New Jersey said, we agree. 90%. You can't get 90% of the people in New Jersey to agree that Trenton is our capital. But New York's sticking it to us? Count me in. Yep, that's us. So now, lo and behold, after I definitively said this project is over, it brings an incredible benefit to New York City, much less of a benefit to New Jersey. New York's paying none of it. New Jersey's paying almost all of it. This is unfair, and I'm not doing it to the people of New Jersey. I'm not burdening our children with billions and billions of dollars of more debt, no matter how much the Democrats complain and moan that they want to spend more money that we don't have. So lo and behold, just 2 days ago, Mayor Bloomberg announces a plan to extend the number 7 subway from the west side of New York to Secaucus, New Jersey, at a cost significantly less than the project they were talking about, and now hoping that New Jersey, New York, and the federal government can partner to get this done. Shocking bit of negotiation. Now, of course, there's no there to the plan yet. It's just kind of being talked out in the public. But what does the New York Times have to say today about this? This is what they endorse. Listen to this. This is a quote. The Bloomberg plan is sketchy, and it's not clear where the money would come from, but we support it. Right? I mean, are you kidding? But that sentence, more than anything else, encapsulates the democratic liberal thought process. The plan is sketchy. We have no idea where the money's coming from, but let's go. Let's go get them. It is that thinking that has gotten us in the shape that we're in. We need to stand up and say no to these things. Saying no is not a vice. Saying no when the idea is bad and wrong is a virtue. I thought P.J. O'Rourke said it best about the election results just a couple weeks ago now. He said that wasn't a vote, it was a restraining order. And that's what we need. Now, to let you know what the New York Times, in case you need to understand this, what the New York Times thinks of me, and by extension, of those of you who agree with me, they concluded with this. After all, Mr. Christie is busy making news and charming the right by downsizing his state so it falls on others to think about the future. Now listen, this is what the Goldwater Institute is here to fight against, and that's why I'm here from New Jersey tonight. This thinking that says if you want a future with less public debt for your children to have to pay for, that means you don't care about the future. If you want a future with a smaller government that's less intrusive into your life, you don't care about the future. If you want a future with lower taxes so that you and your children can spend your money in the way that you see fit and not in the way the government dictates to you, you don't care about the future. If you believe that the entrepreneurial spirit, the liberty, the freedom, the energy that comes from letting loose the American people is what makes this country great, not the dictates of a central government in Washington, D.C., or in some state capital, then you don't care about the future. If we all, as Americans, need a manifesto to fight against, I would suggest to you that when a newspaper says that downsizing government is something that proves that you don't care about the future, I don't know what more you need to prove that these are the forces that we need to fight against. These are the ideas. It's not the New York Times we need to fight against. It's not the Democrats we need to fight against. It's not the liberals we need to fight against. It's the ideas. We don't need to personalize this as they do. And you read the rest of that editorial, if you can bear putting the Times website on your computer. You read the rest of that editorial, and you will see that they make it personal. They make it personal because their ideas are inferior. We need to not make it personal because our ideas are superior. And if people want to know why I think this fight is worth fighting, it's because we have to keep that most solemn covenant, the most solemn covenant that we have as Americans. And that is to leave this place better for our children and our grandchildren than it was left for us. And we know the generations before us met that test. And we also know that we will be judged. We will be judged by our children and grandchildren about, at this moment in time, when the crisis was not necessarily a foreign enemy, but that the crisis was created by ourselves, by our own unwillingness to restrain ourselves. They're going to want to know, what did we do in response to that? Did we bury our heads in the sand? Did we assuage ourselves with our creature comforts and say the problems are too big and too difficult and there's someone else's to fix? Or will they say that at this moment we stood up as a people and said, it is time to turn this country around. It is time to return to the principles that Ronald Reagan so clearly expressed for us and that Barry Goldwater expressed for us as well. Is it time to go back to those principles that made this country great and that we're willing to fight for them and that we're willing to sacrifice for them? Because we're not just doing it for us, because we've already had a great life. This country's already provided everyone in this room with the opportunity already to have a great life. It is about what's going to happen to our kids and our grandkids. We will be judged. And so I am completely committed to this cause for the people of my state. I am completely committed to speaking out about these issues, and I am completely committed to making sure that those who are also willing to speak the truth about the challenges that face us will have a partner in New Jersey who will stand up with them, fight with them, and lead a cause that is not only noble, but necessary. Not only right, but righteous. Not only good, but also moral. This is the fight that we are now having. And this is the fight that we must win. And so I come here tonight after meeting so many of you, greatly comforted by the fact that here in Arizona and all over the country, there are people who believe, as I do, that if we are willing to work together, that America's greatest days are still ahead of us, and that states like New Jersey and Arizona and others can help to lead that way towards that greater day in America. You honor me by inviting me here tonight and by your presence and your attention, and I will continue to keep up the fight to restore America as a place that rewards effort and promises us nothing more than the opportunity to exploit the incredible gifts that God has given us and our incredible nation. Thank you all very much.